Sadly, 90% of podcasts don't publish more than 3 episodes. And one of the reasons is that starting a podcast looks relatively easy. And just as you can create an Instagram or TikTok account and start posting, you can get a cheap microphone or use an app on your smartphone to record something you would call a podcast. This seeming ease of use makes it so that people who are attracted to the medium jump into recording and are met with the reality that just like an Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn account, a podcast requires work, consistency, strategy, and investing money in training and support to really see your show going to places and achieving all the great things that come with building an audience over time. There's no overnight success in podcasting, but you will build unstoppable momentum with every episode you publish. And in this video, I'll share all of the lessons I have learned over 5 years and counting of producing my own shows, working with clients, and teaching podcasting inside of our programs. Take out your notebook because here come the 4 things you must know before starting a podcast. Lesson number 1, when it comes to your recording equipment, is not a one-size-fits-all solution for all types of situations. I have lost count of how many clients have come to me with equipment they've already purchased that doesn't work for their project. Let me explain. Recording an audio-only podcast in your home or work office requires a different setup and equipment than recording a video podcast live with a co-host in the same location, or recording a scripted video podcast you want to repurpose for LinkedIn or YouTube. Also, running the show alone, being the talent while handling all the technical aspects requires a different setup and equipment than recording with the assistance of a technician or producer in your studio. These are all very different scenarios with very different demands. This is why it's important that you do your research or get an expert on board before purchasing equipment that you may not need or that will make recording your podcast more complicated or stressful. And hey, if this is your first time here, I'm Veronica, Content Marketing Director and Instructor, and my job is to get you behind the microphone and in front of the camera making amazing content. And if you're ready to start your podcast, I have a free mini course called Idea to Podcast Simplified for Business Owners. Go to podcastingsmart.com or find the link in the description. Lesson number 2. Slow down, Speedy Gonzalez, and be strategic. Stephen Covey says in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that it's better to be slow and careful in the right direction than be fast and careless on the wrong path. Listen, let's get real. It takes a lot of time and energy to record a podcast, to make videos, even to create a freaking Canva design. If you don't know graphic design, it takes a lot. Planning and recording one single podcast episode can take you days if you're not trained properly and if you don't understand what you're doing. You have to plan the thing, then show up to record the podcast with high energy and feeling confident. Then you have to set up your equipment, then sit down and perform and record the podcast, then either send those files to an editor or sit down and edit the episode yourself. And I know that some of you are stubborn and don't want to let go of the editing part, and you still editing your podcast. Ja, Veronica, tone it down. And then you have to post it and distribute it and promote it so you have some listeners. If it takes this much work, why on earth would you rush into creating content just to create content that doesn't go anywhere or do anything because it lacks strategy, research, and understanding your audience? Why? Slowing down to see how you can optimize your production workflow with better equipment and recording tools, learning about SEO and how to introduce keywords into your episodes, as well as improving your content and distribution strategy will pay off. When you learn all these things, which by the way are not very difficult to learn, you will know for a certainty that your podcast will pick up instead of throwing episodes out there like spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. Slow, strategic, and steady always wins the race. And lesson number 3, and this is an important one. What is your expected ROI, or what do you expect to get in return for the hard work that you will put into this project? And Mira, let me tell you, slow down, Speedy Gonzalez.
Oh, Speedy, he like me.
Oh, that's Speedy. Someday.
I know that podcasting and making content is super fun, but if you're not getting anything out of it besides bragging rights, your enthusiasm and passion for the podcast will quickly fade. Don't jump into podcasting without having a clear idea of the ROI you want your podcast to generate. And when I talk about ROI, it's not measured necessarily in how much money you'll make directly from running ads on your podcast, which, by the way, will be pennies if you're just starting. There are different ways that your podcast can generate ROI for you and your business. Your ROI or measure of success can be more clients signing up for your programs who come directly from the podcast, or maybe shorter sales cycles because your podcast is educating your audience and helping you gain trust. Or maybe your ROI is that your podcast is helping you build your content strategy and presence online so you can generate demand for your services or products on other platforms. Or maybe your expected ROI is to be able to interview influential people in your industry and grow your authority through the power of association. Having a clear idea of what you want to achieve with your podcast will help you avoid getting frustrated and bored because you don't know how to measure the success of the project. There are no goals or markers telling you whether or not your strategy is working or if your efforts are being well invested. And lesson number 4, get help, but understand what kind of help you need for your podcast. Getting talented and creative people to support you and help you launch your podcast is a great idea. Think of how exciting it will be now to do all the technical learning, planning, and strategizing alone. But before you rush into hiring people because you finally want to see this project in motion, let me give you the insight into the different roles or support you can get to launch your podcast. If you're a busy CEO and you only have the time to record your podcast and make your content, let's say once a month, because you're running a 7 or 8 figure business, then you need a podcast production team. A podcast production team may include a podcast producer or a podcast manager, planning and coordinating the production process, a technician helping you set up and troubleshoot your recording studio and assisting you in recording the podcast. You also need editors to turn the raw recordings into podcast episodes, YouTube videos, and short videos. You also need someone in charge of the distribution and promotion of the podcast, making sure that the podcast is posted and distributed, and also putting assets together to promote the podcast on your newsletter and social media channels. And if you don't want to hire your podcast team directly, you can outsource this work. We do this for clients, so the only thing that you do is to show up and record your podcast, and we'll take care of the rest. But what if it's not within your budget to have a production of this magnitude? Well, the good news is that you can still create a professional podcast on a tight budget. For example, you can hire a podcast coach to help you put a production and distribution workflow in place with the right tools and the right equipment, so it's easy to manage on your own, and also teach you the strategies to grow your audience faster and avoid making mistakes. We have a group coaching program where we teach students to produce and launch their podcast efficiently, and doing it with the support of a community of other business owners launching their podcast as well. If you're already well-versed in podcast production, maybe the person you need to hire is either a podcast manager or a podcast editor. A podcast manager can help you with the administrative task like publishing your episodes or managing content across different platforms. And listen, at the bare minimum, I want you to hire a podcast editor. Podcast editing is time consuming. The last thing you want to do is having to spend hours editing your podcast when you should be making sales, networking, and doing all the things that are vital for your business. Whether you hire a podcast team, outsource your podcast production, or hire a podcast coach, take the time to do your research to make sure they have the experience and the credentials to add value and creativity to your project. There's a lot of people out there who will happily take your money even if they're not qualified or don't have the experience to do the work. You don't have to launch your podcast alone. Drop your questions in the comments and I will reply to the best of my abilities. I'm also adding a list of resources for you in the description. And if you want to see us in action putting together a podcast studio for 2 people to record a video podcast or do a live stream, we made this super fun video taking you behind the scenes on how to record a video podcast, the equipment we use, the software we use, and some awesome tricks.